In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural oxidized bronze material. So after we create the procedural nodes, I'll show you how to join the material together into this custom node group so you can control the material. So I'll just review the material settings. So we have the overall scale to change the size of the material. Then we also have the oxidation color. So I kind of have this as a bluish greenish color, but you can change the color there. Then we also have the oxidation amount. So I can turn this up and down. So if I turn it way down, you can see there's just the base metal of the bronze, or if I turn it up, it can be very oxidized. And then we have some detail levels, so detail level 1 and detail level 2 for the oxidation. Then we have the bronze colors, so we have colors 1 and color 2 to change the colors of the base metal. Then we also have the chunk size, so if you want to make those chunks bigger you can, or make them smaller. We also have the roughness of the metal, so you can make it very shiny if you want to, or you can make it more rough. And then we have some different bump strengths. So we have the first bump strength and the second bump strength. And then we also have the chunks bump strength if you want to make those chunks go deeper. And if you'd like to purchase this material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And if you'd like to purchase all of my materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube. And then just one more thing before we continue, I wanted to let you know about my Blender course, my sci-fi construction robot. So that is an 11-part tutorial series where I show you step by step in real time how to create this sci-fi construction robot character. So the course covers the entire process, including modeling the character, doing the materials and the lighting, and even rigging the robot and rigging the treads, and then animating the robot and creating this finished animation. If you'd like to learn more about the course, you can watch the product trailer video with the link in the description, and you can also find the product pages with the links in the description. So I'll now show you my 3D setup if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I did. So I just went to the add menu and I added an icosphere, and then right after you add the icosphere, right behind me down here in the corner, I turned the subdivisions up to 6, and then I shaded the object smooth with the object context menu. But the default objects in Blender are quite large. This object is larger than an average human using the real life scale in Blender. So I'm going to scale this object down by 0.2 and hit enter, and I'll press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. So that is a better size. I'm also going to go to the add menu and I'm going to add a cylinder because I thought it would be nice to preview the material on a cylinder. And I'm going to scale the cylinder way down, and I'm going to move the cylinder over, and I could also rotate it a little bit, and I can go into edit mode and I can scale it up on the Z axis a bit. I can also hold down the Alt key and select the loop here, press Ctrl B to add a bevel, and you can scroll your mouse wheel to make more cuts. Place that there, select this loop, Ctrl B to add a bevel, and then back in object mode you can use the object context menu to shade it smooth. Then I'm also going to press Ctrl 1 just to add a subdivision surface with 1 level. And because we scaled the object down, we're going to press Ctrl A and apply the scale as well, so that's the new object's default size. Now as for the lighting, I added in these 4 different area lights right here. And if you select the area light and go to the object data properties, this first area light is here on the back, and I set the power to 14 and I made it kind of a yellowy color to add kind of a rim light on the back. Then I have another area light right here, and for this one I turned the shape to rectangle and I turned up the Y size just to give it another rim light behind the objects. And then we have 2 lights here on the front. So this one here on the left side, I set the power to 140, and again it's that slight yellow color. And then also I have the main light here, and this is coming from this side, pointed down on the objects, and I have the power up to 200, and I made it quite large. Now also to get some more realistic lighting or reflections, I added in this Artist Workshop HDRI, and this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, so the links will be in the description if you'd like to download it. And on polyhaven.com, I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. So after you download the HDRI, you can click on the yellow dot here next to color. You can choose environment texture, and this is on the world properties. And then once you choose environment texture, you can click on open, and you can open up the downloaded HDRI. And I also set the strength to 1.5, so it was a bit stronger. Now as for the other render settings, I am using the Cycles rendering engine because I am going for realism. And then also, if you want to, you can open up the film tab and you can checkmark the transparent button so that the HDRI is transparent in the background, but it'll still light the objects. And then also, if we go down here to the color management, I'm going to be using the View Transform of Filmic, and I'll set the look to very high contrast to pop out the colors and make things look more saturated. And then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera right at the objects. And over here on the object data properties of the camera settings, I did turn the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom the camera in a bit. So I'm in the shader editor, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode, and I have the shader editor right over here. So I'll select the object, let's click on new to add a new material, and I'll call this oxidized bronze, and then I will put the material on both of the objects. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on edit and you can go to the preferences, and then over here in the add-ons tab, you can go to the search, and you can search for the Node Wrangler and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So we're going to start by creating the oxidation texture. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a noise texture. And with the noise texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T, and that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. What I can also do is hold down the Control and Shift key and select different nodes, and that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler to preview the nodes on the object. Now I'm going to be using the object coordinates, so let's place the object into the vector of the mapping, and the object coordinates will place the textures on the object more evenly. Now I want to keep my nodes nicely organized, so I'm going to box select the mapping and texture coordinate. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame, and with the frame selected, I'll press F2 to add a label, and I can call this mapping. And this is totally optional, but I'm just going to do this to keep the nodes nicely organized. So now let's change the noise texture settings. So I'm going to click on the FMB right here, and I'm going to change this to the multifractal instead, and then I'll turn the scale up to like an 18, and I'll turn the detail up to 15, and I'm also going to turn the roughness all the way up to 1 so it's very detailed, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now I want to make it more contrasty, so I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp after the noise texture. And then we can change the color ramp settings. So I'm actually going to flip these values. So I'll drag the black tab over here, and then the white tab I'll drag kind of to about here in the center. So you can see it's very contrasty, and we now have a very detailed texture. Now later on, when we create the custom node group, I'm going to want to control how much of the oxidation there is. So what I can do is go to the add menu, and I can search for the hue saturation value node, and I'll put this in between the noise texture and the color ramp. So we now have this value right here, and if I drag this up and down, this is making it lighter or darker, and so this is going to be used later on to control how much oxidation there is. So let's box select all these nodes. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame, and I'll press F2 to add a label, and I'll rename that to oxidation. So I now want to create another group of textures, which is just going to be some noise. So what I'll do is go to the add menu, and I'm just going to search for another noise texture. Let's drop this here, and we want the same mapping vector. We want to put that into the vector so that it's using the object coordinates. Let's also click on the factor, and we're going to drag out and then let go right here. And I'm going to search for a color ramp, so we'll go to the color ramp factor and drop this here because I'm going to want to make it more contrasty. And let's Control Shift and select to preview it. So now I can change the noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 20, and I'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and I'll turn the roughness all the way up to 1. So it's pretty detailed. But then to make it more contrasty, we can use the color ramp. So I'm actually going to drag the black tab into the center, and then I'm going to drag the white tab over to the other side. But then if I click on the white tab, I want to make it less visible. So I'm going to make it kind of like a gray color. And if you want to use the same hex value that I'm using for this gray color here, then the hex value, it's going to be a hex value of B1, B1, B1. Let's box select these two nodes. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame, and I'll add a label and just call this noise. So I now want to create another group of textures down here, which is going to be the chunks texture. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop it here. Let's drag the mapping down here, and I'll plug the vector into the vector of the Voronoi so that it's using the object coordinates. And I'm going to Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture to preview it. And let's change some of the settings. So I'm going to first change the scale, and I like a scale of 27. So you can see there's lots of dots there. However, I want to click on the F1 here, and I want to change it to smooth F1 so that the edges in between those circles there are nice and smooth. And then let's change the detail to the max of 15 so it's really detailed, and I can just leave the other settings how they are. So we're going to use all these little dark areas to make the chunks, but I want to make it more contrasty. So I'll go to the add menu, and again, we're going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put it after the Voronoi. And then I can just drag this white tab over to make it more contrasty, and I'll just drag the white tab to about there. Now later on, when we create the custom node group, I'm going to want to control the size of the chunks. So again, we can go to the add menu, and just like we did before, we can add a hue saturation value in between these two nodes. Now this value is going to make it lighter or darker, and so that's going to make the chunks bigger or smaller later on in the custom node group. So I'll box select these nodes, and I'll join them together into a frame, and I'll add a label, and I'm going to call this chunks. So now I'm going to add the different colors, and we're going to start to mix all three of the textures together. So I'll just drag these nodes out of the way for now. So I'll go to the add menu, and to mix the colors together, I'm going to add the mix color node. So we'll drop the mix color node right here, and we can use this to mix together the different groups of textures. So I'm first going to put this over here, and we're going to take the noise color, and we're going to put that into the factor of the mix. And I can control shift and select the mix to preview it. So then here in color A and color B, we can make the different colors. So for color A, I'm going to make this the main color of the bronze metal. So I'm going to make this kind of like an orangey dark color. And then color B is going to be just like a gray color. And if you want to use the same colors I'm using, for color A, the hex value is going to be 3A, 32, 2D. And then color B is going to be a hex value of BC, BC, BC. So that's going to be the base color of the bronze metal. So now I want to mix in the oxidation. So we're going to take this mix, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we can drop it here after the first one, and the result is going to go into color B. So now we can take the oxidation texture, and we're going to put that into the factor, because the factor is determining what parts of the texture will be color A and what parts of the texture will be color B. So now this is going into the factor. Color A, this is going to be the oxidation texture. So I'm going to make this kind of like a greenish bluish color. And the exact same color that I'll be using, the hex value for the oxidation is going to be 468882. So now that's really starting to look interesting. So now I also want to mix in the chunks, and I want the chunks to be the darker metal color. So I'll click on the mix, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, drop it here, and then the chunks right here, the chunks color is going to go into the factor. And then this mix result is going to go into color A, and then for color B, that is going to be the same dark color right here as the metal, so we can click and drag and drop the color here into the mix. And let's control Shift and select it to preview it. Now there's a problem here, and that is that where the chunks are, you can only see the oxidation there, but then everywhere else it's just this gray color. And that's because we need to change the light and dark values of the chunks texture. So to do that, I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for another color ramp. We can put the color ramp here in between the chunks and the mix. So stick it right here, and then we can actually flip these values. So I'm going to drag the white tab to about here, and the black tab I'll drag over to about there. And what I'm also doing, if I control shift and select the color ramp, by dragging these really close together, I'm making the chunks really contrasty. So it's very dark and then very light where the chunks are. So that is going into the factor. So we're basically telling it that wherever the white parts are, that is where color B is going to be, but then everywhere else where the black parts are, that is where the mix is going to be. So if I control shift and select the mix, you can see the chunks just look a bit darker. So now the mix result can go into the base color of the principled shader, and I can control shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And then to make it look more like metal, let's turn the metallic up, so turn it all the way up to 1, and we can also turn the roughness down a bit to make it look more like metal. So that is looking pretty interesting, but I want to make a little bit of variation in the roughness, and then I also want to add a little bit of normal, and I want to add some bump, especially where the chunks are. First, I'm going to box select these nodes, and I'll join them together into a frame, and I will add a label to the frame, and I'll rename this to color. So now let's create the roughness map, and we'll add a bit of variation to the roughness. So I'll drag the principled shader over here, and I can take the mix result here, and I'm going to put that into the roughness. But then you can see it's really shiny, so to control that better, I can control the values. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp here between the roughness and the mix. So if I click on the black tab here, you can see if I make this lighter, it's going to make everything more rough. Or if it's darker, it's going to be more shiny. So I'm going to make this first one here kind of like a light gray, and then this one over here, I'll make it a dark gray. And the hex values that I'll be using are going to be B3, B3, B3 for the lighter one, and then the darker one is going to be a hex value of 5E, 5E, 5E. And then later on when we create the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness. So an easy way to control the roughness is to just have a value which is going to make it lighter or darker. So to do this, we can just add a hue saturation value node, and we'll put this after the color ramp. So now the value, we can drag this up and down to make it lighter or darker. So I'm going to join these together into a frame, and I'll add a label, and I'll call this roughness. Now this metal material is very smooth, and so I want to make it very bumpy, and I especially want to add some bump to the chunks. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a bump node, because whatever data is going into the normal, we need to use a bump node to convert it to bump data. So the first thing that I want to do is add the oxidation. So we're going to take the oxidation color ramp, we'll put the color into the height value of the bump to convert it to bump data, and then the bump normal can go into the normal of the principled shader. So now you can see it looks really bumpy, but that's way too strong. So what I want to do is turn the strength way down to a 0.15. And then personally, I think that turning the invert on looks a bit better, so that it kind of looks like the oxidation is slightly above the other metal. So I like turning on the invert. Now I want to add a few more levels of detail or levels of bump. So I'm going to click on the bump node. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here after this one. And then I'll press Shift D again to duplicate it and drop it here. So we can now add 2 more layers of bump. I'm also going to turn off the inverts on these ones because I don't want them inverted. So the next one that I want to add is some noise. So let's just take this noise color ramp here, and we'll put the color into the next height value of this bump. So now if I turn up the strength, you can see it's just going to add a bunch of noise over the metal. And for this one, I'm going to turn the strength value to a 0.05. So it is pretty subtle, but you can of course turn it up more if you want to. And then for the last one here, I want that to be the chunks. So let's take the chunks right here. I can click on this and drag it down. I want to take the color ramp of the chunks, and let's put that into the height value of this last bump. And now if I turn up the bump strength here, you can see that the chunks look like they're going back inside the mesh. But I do want to make it more subtle, so I'll just turn the strength to like a 0.1 so the chunks are more subtle. And I'll select these nodes, I'll join them together into a frame, and I will add a label to the frame and just call it bump, or you can also call it normal. So I'll now show you how to join this together into a custom node group. So I'm going to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. I can hit the tab key with the node group selected to go in and out of the node group. Let's drag the node group over here, and then I'm just going to make it a bit bigger, and then I want to have the same name as the material name, so I'll copy the material name and I'll paste the material name right there. And then let's hit the tab key to go inside the node group, and I'll press the N key to open up this side panel. And if you click on the group tab here on the interface, we can rename all the different custom values. So here on the BSDF, I'm going to rename this to shader because I like that better. So you can see now it is called shader outside of the node group. Now if you go over here to this side, we have this group input, and we can plug all the custom values up to the group input. So this mapping node is plugged up to all the textures. So if we use the scale values, that'll change the size of the entire material. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket there. And then if I click on the scale, you can see that it's made up of 3 values, but I instead just want it to be 1 value. So let's click on the type here. We're going to change it to float instead, so it is 1 value. I'll now change the default value here back to 1. And then if I hit tab to go out of the node group, we'll turn the scale back to 1. So now you can actually see the material. And then let's go back into the node group. Now the next value that I want to add is the oxidation color. So if you want to, you could duplicate the group input by pressing Shift D and then plug the values up into it, and you could have multiple group inputs. I'm just going to move the group input around. So I'll drag the group input over here, and then you can take this color here, this bluish greenish color, that's the oxidation, and we're going to put that into color A. And then I will double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to oxidation color. And then I also need to press Alt P just to bring that out of the frame. And then I want to control the amount of oxidation. So this hue saturation value, this value here is going to make it lighter or darker, and so that's going to control the amount of oxidation. So we'll put the value into the extra socket here, and I can give it a name, and I'm going to call it oxidation amount. Then I want to control the detail levels of the oxidation. So I'm going to put the detail of the noise texture here into the extra socket, and also the roughness, put that into the extra socket. And I can rename this to oxidation detail 1, and then this one I'll rename to oxidation detail 2. And then I want to control the bronze colors, so that's the base metal color. So I'll drag the group input over here, and we can take this dark brown color, and we'll put that into the extra socket. And then this brown color over here, we can put this color into the same socket here as as this color A here. And this way, this one single color will control both of the colors on the mixes here. And I'll rename this to bronze color 1. And then the lighter color here, that we can put into the extra socket. And this one we can rename to bronze color 2. And then I want to be able to control the size of the chunks. So we'll drag this down over here to the chunks. And this value is going to make it lighter or darker. And so you can see that's going to make the chunks bigger or smaller. So we'll put the value into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to chunks size. And then I want to control the roughness and the bump. So we'll drag the group input right over here. And again, we have this value here, which is going to make the roughness lighter or darker. So that's controlling the roughness. So we'll put the value into the extra socket here, and I can rename this to roughness. And then I want to finally be able to control the 3 bump strengths. So I'll put the first bump strength into the extra socket and the second bump strength into the extra socket. And I'll rename this to bump strength 1 and bump strength 2. Now the last bump strength here, this one is controlling the chunks. So we'll put this one here into the extra socket, and this one I'm going to call chunks bump strength. All right, let's hit the N key to close the side panel. I'm just going to drag the group input right over here, and I'll hit the Tab key to go outside of the node group, and we can now review the finished procedural material. So we have the scale to change the size of the entire material. Then we also just have the oxidation color, and then we also have the oxidation amount, so you could make it very subtle or make it really strong. We also have a few different detail levels for the oxidation. So if you want to have it be less detailed, you could. I like to keep the detail pretty high, but you could turn this down if you want to. And then we also have the bronze colors. So this is the base metal color underneath the oxidation. So the bronze color 1 and bronze color 2. And then we have the chunk size. So if you want to make it look like it's really worn and chunky and rough, you could like turn that way up, or you could make it really small. We also have the roughness of the material, so I could make this really rough if I want it to look super old, or if I want it to look a bit more shiny and polished, I could turn that down. And then we have a few different bump strengths. We can make it look really rough and bumpy with these bump strengths. And then finally we have the chunks bump strength to make the chunks really bumpy. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished procedural material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you download and install my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library into Blender, you can just drag and drop the materials into your 3D scenes to quickly add materials to your projects and models. And you can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. Links are all in the description. But I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and thank you for watching.